Today's talk is on Cloud Foundry, and really what I want to do is kind of talk about where Cloud Foundry is. Most people have done Cloud Foundry. Raise your hand if you've used Cloud Foundry. Anybody? 2 people, 3 people, kind of? Okay, so instead of talking about just Cloud Foundry and how it works, because you can pretty much get a video on that from YouTube of how to basically do CF push and love it, I'm going to talk about how community works. And a little bit about me. My name's Wray. I'm pretty much a serial entrepreneur. I've done two startups. I'm on my 3rd startup, and I'm also a Cloud Foundry technical fellow. And what that means is I go and read a lot of documents and wonder what the hell we're going to do next. But one good thing about it is you get a lot of experience. And Cloud Foundry's really impacted the way I do things in the past. And I'm going to really do this in 3 stories to give you guys an experience of where Cloud Foundry started, how it affected the enterprise. How many people are in the enterprise space working for an enterprise company? Probably wondering like how you're going to deploy Cloud Foundry and have all this cool stuff going on. And I'm going to give you a story about that, and then also the momentum and how you guys can contribute back. To start off with, the first story is about a little startup that could. I created a startup about 9 years ago called Tier 3. Horrible name. You should never pick Tier 3 as a name for anything, but that's how startups happen. Uber, Snapchat, you name it. But the goal with it is really around cloud computing, and I really wanted to focus on the enterprise side. This is actually one of the screenshots for it. We did basically this all-in-one platform for enterprise customers. We really focused on that side of the house where Amazon was going for developers and getting everybody up and running. My background has always been from running very large distributed systems in Microsoft. So I knew a lot of the enterprise, and it grew really fast. In the first 3 years, we were already at $4 million in revenue. We were growing at 85% per year. I was starting to get VCs, and I bootstrapped it from the start. Another thing to always learn, never clear your bank account without telling your wife. They get pretty pissed when you buy a whole bunch of data center equipment. So we started growing pretty fast, really getting up and running, and we got to about 60 employees. We're growing this out. We're at 9 locations around the world. So I had Europe, had Asia, a couple locations in the US and also Canada, and we were growing out our footprint to basically meet the demand of cloud computing. And the reason I built this is one method only. I was sick of building servers for people. And that's what I did at Microsoft, and I didn't want to do it again. But that really didn't solve everything. I thought it was awesome. I was like, this is what everybody needs. You get a VM, you can configure the hell out of it, it's going to be awesome. You name it, it's going to work great. And then there was this one meeting, and we were at VMware. Our hypervisor layer was actually all VMware at the time, and we were at a meeting, and Paul Moritz was there, and we were talking to him, and I mentioned that I was sick of how crappy like VMs are, and like that you have to configure the hell out of them, basically configure the OS and then maintain it afterwards, and it was just crap. And Paul said, hey, I want you to meet a couple people. And he told me, he got on his cell phone, made a phone call, and he's like, hey, I'm going to have you meet this guy named Jerry Chen and this other guy named James Waters. And he was like, don't trust James. He's crazy. But, and that was the guy on stage, but you should learn what they're doing. And so I went down and I met Derek and James and Jerry, and they showed me something called, I can't remember what they called it at the time. It was a really bad name. It was before they even thought of Cloud Foundry. It was a horrible name. Not as bad as Tier 3, but pretty bad. And they were like, hey, we're going to give you access. Why don't you try it? And I asked him why they wanted me to see, and he goes, well, to be honest, we know that you've built most of your platform in .NET, and none of us know .NET. And this really is supposed to be like a polyglot platform, but nobody knows .NET. So it supports everything except for .NET. Could you just look at it and see what it would take to do that? And right off the bat, I was like, I'm not even going to look at it because it's not going to work. And they begged and begged and begged. And they said, OK, just go home, spin it up, try it out, and get it up and running. I was like, great, OK. I'll do that. That night, I literally went home and I spun this thing up. It was the biggest piece of crap I've ever seen, written in Ruby, but it was amazing at the same time. Literally the first time I did a push, and I've done other languages in the past. I pushed a Python application, got it up and running pretty fast, started scaling it out, got it up to 10 servers that night. By 5 a.m. in the morning, I literally wrote an email to them and said, this is how we could do it in .NET, by basically forking everything on top of it and building basically a forked layer for when .NET went through the pipeline, it would go to Windows servers, because I thought this was the greatest thing ever. And that started it all, because I realized that you're moving in a pace where you're getting rid of complexity with complexity. And so I started off with physical infrastructure. I ran parts of Microsoft.com, search.microsoft.com, and it was all physical servers. But we had a build process that was built for Microsoft, and I was part of the team that built that. And then I went into Tier 3, and in 2006, people started really getting in the cloud and showing compute layers. What Platform as a Service did is eliminate the next layer. And that's going to be really interesting, because a lot of people are talking about serverless. That's going to be sitting on top of a platform as a service. And serverless is going to be that next thing, where you're not even writing applications, you're writing snippets. And that's really where I see a lot of things going, especially in Cloud Foundry and how it's built. So I went in, and I know this is a spring conference, but I want you to know Java and .NET are the two languages that just dominate the enterprise. And so I started building out .NET, and I was doing it as an open source project while running a startup. We launched Iron Foundry, and actually Ruckles there has a shirt. We launched Iron Foundry within a month after Cloud Foundry launched. And it was a complete fork. Like, we hacked the crap out of Cloud Foundry. It was so bad that we tried to do a pull request. And I remember Derek Collison calling me up and was like, we're never going to accept that, because it was so invasive. It literally touched every single module that he built, his beautiful architecture that he loved, and I was hacking the crap out of it to make .NET work. But the amazing thing is, when we launched it, this was the first idea of the enterprise for Cloud Foundry. At the time, Cloud Foundry was really about developer momentum, and they built it at VMware because they're like, hey, this is how we're going to compete with Amazon. We're going to basically launch a platform that it has developer traction and momentum, and a lot of those languages were already native to Cloud Foundry. This was the first taste of enterprise for the Cloud Foundry team, and understanding, wow, look at all these people who actually want to be part of this. And that really came off of it, is the whole idea of like where Spring came, and Spring Cloud and Spring Boot and now Steel Toe. Each one of these are layers of the enterprise, basically building it in and making it really available for everybody. So this was a lot of fun. I actually completely enjoyed building this out. And it was an amazing experience, because we were right at the start of Cloud Foundry. A contribution into Cloud Foundry was still on VMware's repos. There was no organization. There was no foundation. And we were working basically with the original team that built Cloud Foundry at the start. And that was amazing. And one thing I do want to encourage you guys is, out of this, I learned one big thing is, all you have to do is build a prototype. No matter what you guys do, and a lot of companies are talking about this now, you guys need to figure out, like, if you're going to use Cloud Foundry, figure out what are you building that you might be able to contribute back, because there's a lot of effort that needs to go around this. And this was literally a hack that 3 devs basically spent a month and put together .NET. Spring One's the same thing, or the Spring Cloud platform and Spring Boot. They literally said, hey, let's just try this out. And now I'm seeing other companies like SAP and others contributing their ideas, ALM methodologies, and how to get it up and running. And so when you guys think about this and you're having fun, like, think about what can you give back? Because just by doing Iron Foundry, we literally learned more about the Cloud Foundry platform than I ever thought I would learn before, especially how not to do a pull request. Okay, story 2. This is about the enterprise. So when about 7 years into my startup, we were growing pretty good. We had 3 major investors, Madrona, Ignition, and Intel, and we were growing pretty fast. I got this weird meeting from a guy named Jonathan King, and he said, hey, let's just do drinks. And me being a startup founder, I was like, hell yeah, free drinks. This is awesome. So I showed up, and it wasn't just Jonathan, it was another guy named Brian Taylor. And I was like, well, whatever, it's free drinks. Everybody's game on that. So I said, hey, what are you doing? Introduced myself to Brian, and I said, Brian, what do you do? And he goes, I buy companies for CenturyLink. And I said, well, I'm not really interested because you're going to mess us up. And then I basically spent about an hour drinking with them and telling them how bad they were going to mess us up and why, and what they would have to do to agree so that they didn't mess us up. And CenturyLink's an amazing company for the fact that they know what they know. They know that they're screwed up. They know they're a telco. They know their legacy. They have 45,000 employees. But they do know that they have to change. And that was a big thing for them. And they, the next day, they said, hey, we agree to everything you said. We'll agree to your terms. And first, I thought it was a joke. And then they were like, hey, we're going to send over a term sheet offer because we really want to buy your company. And I was like, I was kind of joking, and it was just drinks. And then they convinced me like a week later to do it. So when we got in here, I've been in the enterprise my entire life, but I've been in the tech side of the enterprise. This is definitely not the tech side, and many of you probably relate to this. When we started learning how CenturyLink worked, I remember the first moment, it was about a week in after the acquisition, and we had 9 locations worldwide. We wanted to double that and get up to about 18 very quickly. And so we said, hey, no problem. Here's our procurement process. We just need the cash, and we'll get it taken care of. And they said, no problem. Easy. You guys can knock it out in a week. I don't think they've ever used their procurement process because it took us 6 months to actually just figure out how the systems work to get a PO issued so that we could buy all the gear to basically expand that fast. And what was really amazing about it is it was 17 different groups, and none of them talked to each other. And this was kind of the common theme that we started doing. And through this, we were like, okay, we're not going to stop. We're pretty aggressive people. We're going to keep on going. So the next thing that came up is we had this awesome thing called the merger audit. So during an acquisition, they do all these due diligence and things like that, but a lot of people aren't involved. After the acquisition, we had this high-level security guy come in. And he's the man. Like, he used to work for the FBI, and he'll probably kill you or something. He talked a lot of big words, and I didn't understand them. And he was like, hey, we just need to change a couple minor processes for you guys. And he's like, first off, no deploying to production at all. As a matter of fact, you can't even deploy to stage. We have an entire teams to do that. And also, no developer access or engineer access to any of those environments either. So we just need to put a firewall in there. We'll install it next week. It's going to be awesome. And we said, okay, that's a great idea. Super good concept. But we want to let you know that we deploy over 120 changes per day. So if you guys can handle that, we'll just, instead of doing a direct pipeline to production where we're doing it live all the time, we'll just cut that automation down and send you guys an email with all the requests that we need changed. And the guy was like, well, I didn't understand you were so automated. Okay, well, we won't do that yet, but we need to put a firewall somewhere. So let's figure out where we can put a firewall. So the first firewall that they put in was basically in our in CenturyLink, what we call CenturyLink Labs, which was basically our office. And that day, we put in a request for a direct line to a data center where we bypassed that and then installed our own wireless. So they had a firewall with no traffic going through it. But they did have that firewall, which they were super excited about. Also during that time, and we started growing really fast inside CenturyLink. We went from 60, I think it was, up to 110 people. And they had this other company that they bought called Savvis. And Savvis was a big data center provider. what was great about them is they loved the process that CenturyLink had in place. They had like 7 teams, this huge pipeline. It was awesome. And it wasn't awesome because they never launched a single thing in 2 years. Not a single thing. And so one meeting I had with Glenn, the CEO, he said, Jared, we're going to do a reorg, and I'm giving you all of Savis's hosting, not their data center side, just all their hosting. And I want you to show me that your model is actually better and will work. And I was like, okay, this is interesting. So we went from about 8 to 9 teams, each team about 8 people, to 35 teams in about 2 weeks, running this agile process. And we started really working on this. How are we going to do this process? How are we going to scale it? And we started getting into this methodology. And this is something that you need to understand as someone who's going to use Cloud Foundry. It's not just Cloud Foundry. It's a whole culture change that's going to happen or not. And so we started working with these teams at Savis, and we literally converted them over to them owning the entire operations. There was no middle management anymore. We basically changed the entire process, and we forced them to automate everything. They went from literally manual. They would produce a document called their deployment doc 3.2, which was about 70 pages, and it had every single line that you're supposed to put in the terminal to be able to basically install the software. And they would print it out, it wasn't digital, and give it to the operations people. And the operations people would manually go in and do that. So we said, no, you don't even have ops people anymore. You build it, you run it, you own it. You even own basically the roadmap for it, and it has to be fully automated. This is where Cloud Foundry changed the way we did things. Because not only did we need it automated, but we needed it fully programmable. And because we had 35 teams and no operation organization or even testing organization, because we got rid of everybody, all the testers went to development, it had to be self-service. So we came up with this mantra called Run by Robots or Oompa Loompas, which is basically everything has to be automated all the way through. You own it all the way through. You have to stack it all the way through, and no more manual process. How many people have seen Charlie and the Chocolate Factory? Amazing Oompa Loompas. They made chocolate. They were awesome. They worked in a factory, but it was all manual. They did very little automation, and that's what we needed. This is where we actually brought in Cloud Foundry. The first installation we actually owned AppFog was AppFog, and then we built V2 internally, and we had a Cloud Foundry cluster. Out of the 35 teams, I mean, some people were running core infrastructure that we were running on top of, but out of those 35 teams, 18 of them were running on Cloud Foundry, building their next generation services, pushing, deploying worldwide across all of our platform. We would have never been able to scale without Cloud Foundry, just for the fact that we couldn't control it. We didn't have the permission systems. We needed spaces. We needed different environments. There was one group that needed 7 different environments, and they spun it up in a day on Cloud Foundry. So going to this automation idea and self-service, the team that was running AppFog, they literally became one of the backbones for all products that were running on top of it.
So when you say environments, right, is that equivalent to spaces?
Yeah. So basically, we would give an org to every single team, and they would create spaces under each one based off of what they wanted. One had 7 different environments because they were testing different type of scenarios.
So in that structure, could it have been so if you had that platform was Cloud Foundry, right?
Mm-hmm.
You had squares for spaces, and then within a space, I'm an organization. I can create my own sub units.
Yep. And we let the teams own that.
That could be my test dev, pre-prod, production.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and it was really cool because we actually started. So the question was, how were they able to build that, and what was the organizational structure? So every team got their own org inside Cloud Foundry, and then inside that org, the team decided what their structure was going to be. We actually had best practices But what was cool about it is they actually went through and said, this is how we're going to structure, how we're going to run our version of the business. And each one was their own dedicated service, either an internal service that they did. We had an identity management team that did all their identity management on Cloud Foundry, and they provided APIs. And we had teams like WordPress as a service or Backup as a service, and they had all their APIs there. So when we started this whole idea, we started with 9 major features, and this was actually from the core cloud team. When we brought in Sabis and we basically redid this, in 6 months we did 25 major services, just because we gave them access to this. And it was well worth the battle. We fought a lot with a lot of people. There was a lot of people who didn't like it. But I'm telling you, sometimes it's good to work in collaboration with operations teams. It's also good to get Cloud Foundry installed and get access to it, and then show how it works. Sometimes you just have to break some glass. Robert Miles told me that yesterday, and it's very true. Breaking a lot of glass. Okay, so that was about the enterprise. And it was a big experience. I spent 2 years basically redefining how they were building stuff, and it changed almost every sector of CenturyLink, from the way that they did their process to procurement to how they're actually building out resources. They've never seen a way of doing development and team building at that level. And the whole time, we actually used that base of Cloud Foundry to make it happen. And Cloud Foundry's gotten even better. So the last story is where we are now today. Cloud Foundry is really growing fast. How many of you guys went to the CF Summit? One person? Okay. So at CF Summit this year, last year there was 1,600 people, and we were pretty thrilled about that. This year there was 2,500 attendees, basically over an open source project and making it happen. And to bring this all back, about eight or 9 months ago, we got this phone call, and they're like, hey, we need to get .NET not forked, but all the way through the system. And this is what community is all about. It was the Pivotal guys that called us up, and they're like, hey, we need it fully integrated, we need it battle tested, and we need it to work. And we need new .NET cores coming out, but a lot of people still run .NET 4.5. So they said, how are we going to do this? They wanted to ramp up a team, get a new architecture. It has to be a distributed team, just because we had the CenturyLink Cloud guys who did the development before, and they had a team in New York that was working it, and we had to teach everybody Windows and Windows operation, which Bosch wouldn't even support at the time. Stem cells didn't even exist for them. So this was kind of interesting, because 3 years ago we launched Iron Foundry, and it was kind of always a fork and always was part of this. And then as the community got better and better, it started moving together, and we started getting more and more code check-ins, more people interested. And there was this point when the foundation started that we moved past this. We moved to this part where we're like, there's actually incubation now. The foundation knows how to run this. And Iron Foundry today doesn't even exist. And you're like, wow, is that a success story? Actually, it is, because nobody actually wanted Iron Foundry to be a separate project. Now it's part of the entire runtime. So if you run a full Pivotal environment, PCF, you can actually run Windows inline, which is huge for everybody. This is the success of a community that actually worked together. It wasn't just Pivotal who did it. It was a whole bunch of devs on both sides that ended up contributing together. And there's a whole bunch of projects around this. Diego is another one. Amazing project. A lot of outside contributors. There's a couple new ones that have been started up recently that I'm getting really excited about. And it was a lot of fun. When we worked on this, it was surprising how fast the community grew. In 3 years, we went from basically 0 to 150 meetups globally. And if you guys haven't gone to a meetup, you should, because it's not just about Cloud Foundry. It's literally engineers talking to engineers about scaling. And there's probably one in every single local town. It's really nice. I talked about the summit. There was 2,500 attendees. They're expecting even more next year. And we're expecting that to grow above that. And on top of it, like Spring One, I think they said 1,800 to almost 2,000 attendees just for this. That's where it gets really amazing. There's over 60 major companies now involved in this and contributing. And sometimes that actually goes bad, and that's one of the reasons I'm a technical fellow, is I'm trying to help manage that relationship. But it's also the community repos. There is over 55 build packs that are community sponsored, and there's 9 core ones that are sponsored by Pivotal. And this is where I want you guys to look as you start building stuff in the enterprise, especially around Spring, because these are things that still aren't public. They're not public enough. The new ideas, the new great ideas. And the last thing is just relax and contribute. This is all I care about. If you're building something, get it out there, push it live, prototype it. You would be surprised how fast the community would actually start embracing it. Here's the 2 repos that I really care about. GitHub.com/Cloud Foundry and GitHub.com/Cloud Foundry Communities. Cloud Foundry is the core one that has basically everything in it. Cloud Foundry Community is kind of like the community that's built a whole bunch of stuff around it. A lot of build packs are in there from things like even Rust, which I haven't even used yet, which is cool. Okay, any questions? Great.
On how do you approach seeding Cloud Foundry? You know, like from a resource standpoint, what I read is to get it going is super heavy.
Yeah. It's a big environment. I mean, an average install. So one of the question is, how do you kind of seed Cloud Foundry into an environment? You know, I think there's a couple ways you do it. The most successful ways, and I'll give you 2 examples. One example was basically they did it shadow. They found a project that they knew they could get executive sponsorship with, and they knew they needed to go fast. And so they said, we're going to go and actually work with Pivotal and bring Pivotal in and get it up and running. And I've heard that a couple times from people, that that's kind of like one of the best practice approaches, because you're kind of getting that executive sponsorship. They get you up and running really quick. You have that support behind you, which was really cool. The other way that I've been really surprised with is engineering teams are now sponsoring internal hackathons of basically doing ideas. There was a hackathon and a group at Intel that was building out a Cloud Foundry environment for test dev. And they said, hey, we're going to allow basically 1-day hackathon or a 2-day hackathon where you could put together as a team, and they would vote on the idea and the project, and you would have a month to complete it. So you'd have 2 days to kind of prototype it, and then that team would have a month to complete it on their off hours, and whatever benefits Intel. And the people who won was, they won basically by doing a geolocation service for Intel, so they could track where everybody was. And that hackathon literally started with a dev environment, and now it's like full production for everybody. So 2 good ways to kind of just start seeding it in. In Cloud Foundry, it's heavy, but you can run like Cloud Foundry on a cloud if you wanted to, and swiping a card for a couple days and seeing how it goes. Bosch Deploy is really good at this point.
How's your experience with, I thought PCFdev was super useful.
Yeah, it's great for local development. It takes I will say, like, get a beefy box. I used to run on a MacBook Air. Now I don't because of PCFdev. You really need about 8 gig of RAM. Yeah. They'll say 4, but really you need 8, just because there's so much in there. But it's really good.
So we were just talking right before the presentation, and someone asked me yesterday what was DevOps, right? And I thought I knew until somebody asked me. And then I thought about it a little bit. Is the DevOps term the development operations, or initially when I first heard it, I thought it was development continuation into operations.
Yeah.
I think it maybe could be both in some situations. I don't know.
Yeah, I got to end now, but just to give you a perspective on this, I don't think anybody actually knows what DevOps is until they experience it. I lean to the second side, which is developers and engineers actually running things in production, and giving that operations factor is really where it is. I've heard enterprises talk about teams of DevOps people, and I think that's kind of weird. Basically, they're just renaming operations people. Right. So Cool. Thank you so much.